Hi guys, and welcome back to The Wargamer, and in this video I'm going to be having a quick flick through the new campaign book from Bolt Action, which is of course New Guinea. Now this focuses on the conflicts between 1942 and 1945 in the area around New Guinea, and focuses heavily on the Australian and Japanese forces, but there is some mention in this book of the American and Dutch forces as well. So open this book up, we're going to be going straight into some of the scenarios that we get in here. Now, the first one is a very interesting one indeed. Now it's a beach landing scenario, but it's slightly different. Instead of the forces landing for the duration of the game, they're already landed on the beach and they get ambushed by the Australian forces. This is a Japanese landing area here. So this basically represents a real world situation where the Japanese landed on the beach at night. Didn't expect any enemy resistance, and basically they got ambushed. So you'll see this theme running across the book. There's lots of ambush tactics, lots of units being hidden, set up. There's kind of a lot of ambushing between the two. So a lot less conventional warfare that you've seen in other campaign books, more like hit and run tactics, guerrilla warfare, things like that. So we kind of carry on to some more scenarios here. You can see we've got like a small village scenario here as well. Kind of continues. We have some actual special characters listed in this book as well, as you see all the way through these campaign books. Now this is a Sergeant Major Katu, and it's basically a specialist sniper team that you can field in your forces. Again, many more scenarios that have their ambushes and things like that. We've got another character here. We've got Lieutenant Colonel Hatsuro Sakamoto. I believe probably a really bad pronunciation of that word there, but I don't know very Japanese very well. Again, more ambushes, this time with this creek with a small bridge here. Now, one thing I actually really like about these modern campaign books is the battlefield, the playing fields that they give you. Have some idea of what kind of scenery you should be setting out, and very clearly defined. So you can see you should have a road down the center, a river intersecting that with then foliage on either side, and when you kind of flick through you can see even more so. We've got another character here, which is Captain Geoffrey Vernon, who is basically a specialist medic. Flicking through here, again another really good example of how these maps are designed. Now I've skipped over them just for the time being. There's lots of these special rules listed here, and you can see these will be covered at the back of the book, so I'm not going to touch on those, but many of them have these kind of jungle warfare and ambush special rules. So more beach attacks here. So we've got some basically almost like a reverse beach assault. The Allied forces are actually attacking the Japanese forces who are on the beach from inland. So kind of a strange little beach scenario there. Now I'm going to kind of skip forward. We've got a lot more kind of scenarios at the beginning of the book. It's quite nicely laid out with all the scenarios listed at the beginning, so you can kind of go through them, work through them as you see fit. And it should be mentioned that a lot of these scenarios as well actually have providence for using both US forces, Australian forces, and even some Dutch forces in them as well. But pretty much the only enemy you'll be facing in these, playing as an Allied player, will be the Japanese forces. So if I'm going to flick through right to the last few here, you can see there's quite a few scenarios. I think there's about it's about 12 scenarios altogether. And kind of listed all the way through this book is really nice in-depth background about the scenarios which are actually the real events, the real life events inspired, and also about the forces, about the particular noteworthy characters. Those that don't even have their own special rules in the book are mentioned quite frequently. So this brings us to about halfway through the book. We're about page 76 at the moment, and this is where we actually have a whole army listing for the forces of Australia, which is really nice because up to now, if you wanted to represent Australian forces, you had to just use the armies of Great Britain and use one of their national characteristics, but they've actually got their own units in here as well. So first of all, we have the national special rules. So we have limited artillery support, which basically kind of negates the advantageous artillery support that the regular British Army have. Kind of represents jungle covered areas not being quite as effective for artillery spotters. We also got some special rules such as aggressive patrolling here, which basically allows them to win the roll off for forward deploying. So if you've got a sniper, the opponent's got a sniper, and you want to deploy them at the same time, Australians are probably going to be able to deploy theirs first. We also have the never give up special rule as well, and I think this one basically gives them whenever they're the defender in an assault, they count as having the fanatic special rule. But in addition to that, we also have a choice of 3 special rules that you can choose from. These represent different points in the campaign and kind of what characteristics characteristic they were displaying at that point in the battle, and a lot of the scenarios will specifically refer to which one the Australian players should use. So first of all, we have Australia is next, a very simple, straightforward rule. Every Australian unit gets stubborn. We also have fighting withdraw, which is a really interesting little special rule, which basically means that after an advance move, you can flip your dice to ambush immediately afterwards, so long as you move towards your own table edge. So you can kind of, as you're retreating, you can kind of get ready to attack any advancing forces from the enemy. We also have Jungle Warfare Masters as well. And this is actually quite a bit of a larger one. Essentially, it's almost like the German initiative training. So if you lose your NCO, you don't suffer a -1 to your leadership, and you can go down as a reaction to an ambush event even if you've reacted that turn. So it's quite a useful little feature, that one is. Very much detailed for jungle warfare. So actually come to the unit listings themselves. We have fairly standard unit listings. We have officers, forward observers, medics, things like that. We do have a few additional items in here. So all the listings that you see here will have their own special rules, but most of them are used from the Armies of Great Britain book itself. So we can think here we have the medic, which allows you to have native bearers. So you can basically have 1 to 4 unarmed men to act as stretcher bearers. We also have another special character here, which is a 15-point upgrade for a medic team, and basically allows them to roll an extra d6 when rolling to heal casualties. Next up, we start moving on to the infantry squads and teams. We have the militia infantry section, which are of kind of a very early form, so they're not quite as well equipped as the later units are. They're equipped with a Lewis gun, which is basically the same as a regular LMG, but it does 1 less shot than normal. We also have a few more infantry sections here. We have the AIF infantry section, a slightly more better equipped unit, actually has proper LMGs. You can also equip some of them with submachine guns as well. A jungle division infantry section, again same kind of thing as before. However, they do have, I believe they have a bit more access to submachine guns than their infantry section equivalent. We also have the platoon scout team, a regular unit or veteran unit which allows them to forward advance. I also have some independent company commando section as well, so a little bit like the commandos we've already seen in the Armies of Britain book, but they have I think a slightly different complement of weapons there. Next unit we have is a very interesting one. This is the independent company raiding party. Now this is quite different in its composition compared to other units, because you actually have captains attached to the unit itself. So you can have up to I think you can have up to 16 units in here, and you can also have a captain, a lieutenant, major, things like that. They have lots of special rules. Behind enemy lines, they have they have tough fighter rules. They have a local scout ability, which basically allows them to work through the jungle better. And then we have jungle engineer section, kind of your regular engineer unit that you find in bolt action. Regular weapons, but often equipped with a flamethrower as well. And then we have some Papuan infantry battalion section. This represents some of the natives that have been armed by the Australians. These are actually quite an effective unit. Sometimes these native units have inexperienced or regular, but these actually go all the way from inexperienced all the way up to veteran. And these have some really nice special rules, such as fieldcraft, so they count as rough terrain as open terrain for the first turn that they move. They can have forward deployment, jungle fighters. They have behind enemy lines, and also the native troops. So they actually don't give up, but they don't benefit from the never give up special national characteristic. Next few units we have are just basically saying that you can use these items from the regular British Army booklets. So we have Piat teams, heavy mortar teams, medium machine gun teams, things like that. We also have a field artillery, which is basically a light 25-pound gun. You can basically remove the gun shield for a points reduction as well. Vehicles, we have the M3 Stuart light tank, and in addition to that we also have the Matilda CS2 and Frog. We have some Bren gun carriers, general purpose trucks, and the LVT4 Buffalo as well. Now we start moving on to some of the new units that the other forces get. So we've got Japan here, gets some scout units. We also have a engineer force, night infiltrators, which you'll see in the scenarios will be very useful indeed. There's a lot of missions which take place at night. They essentially have forward deployment and tough fighters as well. Lone Sniper is actually quite an interesting special rule. It's basically a sniper team, albeit with just a single man that doesn't benefit from being under strength, but he can take a machine gun as well. and he also gets to ignore his first pin marker also. So quite an interesting additional unit that you can take in your forces. We have a machine gun section here, which is basically an infantry section equipped with a medium machine gun team. It gives you a little bit more resilience, so to speak. You can take a few more wounds before your actual MG starts going out of action. You have the improvised anti-tank team, which replaces the kind of the suicide anti-tank squads from the regular Imperial Armies of Japan book. Basically same kind of thing, but they kind of run in close combat and attack tanks and get like special rules based around that. Next up, we move on to some of the special forces for the Netherlands. We have the KNIL Guerrillas and the KNLI Guerrilla section and light machine gun section as well. Chaplains, again, these have been listed in previous books, so I won't go over those too much. You're probably already aware of those, but they can pretty much be attached to pretty much any of the nations. Next up, we have the theatre selectors. So these are the kind of standard theatre selectors used in the scenarios that we've mentioned already. So we have them for Australia. We also have some for the US forces as well, the Ghost Mountain Boys. We have the KNIL Guerrillas and also Japanese forces as well. So this brings us to the final section in this book, which is the special rules. We have a few special rules for the Japanese army, and this basically represents the generals that the Japanese had and the kind of characteristics that they brought to the battlefield. So we have special rules for troop convoys, basically allows you to take more than your limited complement of units, but they do cost 25% more than regular. We also have a special rule here, which basically allows you to remove a pin marker if you're within 6 inches of a general at the end of your turn. And finally, we have the outflank and destroy special rule, which basically means you don't suffer the -1 dice roll when trying to come in from reserve and in an outflank position. And finally, we have the tropical hazards and also other special rules for use on the scenarios. So we have things like exhaustion, so forces being exhausted and not being full strength. That can really hinder your forces if you get this on a scenario, for example. We have deep mud, which basically has mud which can suck in tanks and basically take back the action for the whole game. We have monsoon season, which can be quite devastating. It reduces visibility, it affects air support, it can cause mud to appear pretty much anywhere on the battlefield. Very, very difficult indeed. We have special rules for night fighting, but then also rules for forces have dug in. So we have dug in vehicles, we have typical barbed wire, trench sections, weapon pits, log bunkers, tunnel networks and decoy log bunkers as well. We also have minefields, which seem to get listed in most of these books, so pretty familiar there. Finally, we have amphibious assaults as well that you can use for your beach assaults. So that's pretty much it. We have some special rules for landing craft that all the forces can use, and then we move on to raiding special rules as well. Basically using silenced weapons and attacking forces that aren't yet alerted to your presence. So that was a quick flick through the campaign New Guinea book. It's a really interesting book, and it's great to see that the forces and the conflict that happened is often overlooked in mainstream history, but it's great that Bolt Action and Warlord Games and Osprey have kind of looked at this section of the war, kind of shed the spotlight on the Australian forces, because it was listed, it was notably referred to as some of the toughest fighting in the war due to the conditions that these forces fought under. I mean, the Japanese forces often lost most of their troops, not even through combat, just through the harsh conditions that they were exposed to on a day-to-day basis. So if you enjoyed this flick through of this campaign book, please do let me know in the comments below. Also, make sure you subscribe to be kept up to date with all my future videos. And if you would like to pick up this book for yourself, I'll include some links in the description, which will take you to both the Warlord and the Osprey Games web stores. So all that's left to say is thanks for watching and goodbye.